Imagine you are a Japanese sailor standing watch on a dark Pacific night in 1943. The ocean is black. The sky is black. You can barely see your own hand in front of your face. Everything is quiet. Everything seems peaceful. You think tonight will be another boring night of patrol duty. Then you hear something, a low rumble in the distance. You strain your eyes trying to see what is making that sound, but you see nothing. The rumble gets louder. It sounds like thunder rolling across the water, but there are no storms tonight. Your heart starts beating faster because you have heard stories, terrible stories, stories about boats that appear from nowhere, stories about boats that move faster than anything you have ever seen, stories about boats that kill and disappear before you can even react. Suddenly you see them, 3 small shapes racing across the water at impossible speed. They are heading straight for your destroyer. You try to sound the alarm, but it is already too late. Massive explosions rip through your ship. Torpedoes have found their mark. And those small boats, they are already gone, vanished into the darkness like ghosts. The Japanese called these boats by a special name. They called them devil boats. And by the end of World War II, Japanese sailors feared these small wooden boats more than they feared the massive American battleships. Today I am going to tell you the complete story of these devil boats. I am going to explain why they were so terrifying. And I am going to reveal how these tiny wooden boats helped America win the war in the Pacific. The boats that the Japanese called devil boats had an official name. The United States Navy called them PT boats. The letters PT stood for Patrol Torpedo. These were small, fast attack boats designed to do one thing extremely well. They were designed to race in at high speed, launch torpedoes at enemy ships, and escape before anyone could shoot back. But here is what made these boats so unusual. They were made of wood. Yes, wood. While every other major warship in World War II was made of steel and armor plating, PT boats were constructed from layers of mahogany planks. This might sound crazy. Why would the Navy build wooden boats to fight against steel warships? The answer was simple. Wood was light, and light meant fast. PT boats were typically about 80 feet long. That is roughly the length of 2 school buses placed end to end. They were only about 20 feet wide. Compared to Japanese destroyer, which could be over 300 feet long, PT boats were tiny. They looked like toys floating next to real warships. But these toys had teeth. Each PT boat carried 4 Mark 8 torpedoes. These torpedoes were 21 inches in diameter and packed over 400 pounds of TNT explosive. A single torpedo hit could cripple a destroyer. 2 hits could sink it completely. The PT boats also carried machine guns. Lots of machine guns. They had twin 50 caliber machine guns mounted in turrets. They had 20mm cannons. Some boats even carried 40mm guns. For a small wooden boat, they packed an incredible amount of firepower. The real magic of PT boats was their engines. Each boat had 3 Packer Marine engines. These were the same engines used in high-performance aircraft. Together, these 3 engines produced over 4,000 horsepower. This gave PT boats a top speed of over 40 knots. That translates to roughly 46 miles per hour. This might not sound impressive for a car, but for a boat carrying torpedoes and machine guns, this was blazing fast. Most Japanese warships could only manage 30 to 35 knots at maximum speed. PT boats could outrun almost anything the Japanese had. The story of PT boats begins before World War II even started. In the 1930s, naval strategists were debating how future wars would be fought. Some believed that small, fast boats armed with torpedoes could be effective against larger ships. The concept was not new. Torpedo boats had existed since the 1800s, but advances in engine technology meant these new boats could be faster and more deadly than anything before. The United States Navy was initially skeptical. American naval doctrine focused on big battleships and aircraft carriers. Small boats seemed like a distraction, but a few visionary officers pushed for the development of PT boats. They argued that these small craft could be useful for coastal defense, for attacking enemy supply lines, and for operations in shallow waters where big ships could not go. In 1939, the Navy finally agreed to test the concept. They invited boat builders to submit designs. Several companies responded. The most successful design came from a small company in New Jersey called Elco. Their 77-foot design impressed Navy officials with its speed and handling. Another company, Higgins Industries from New Orleans, also produced successful designs. When the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, the Navy had only a handful of PT boats in service. But that would change rapidly. The attack on Pearl Harbor devastated the American Pacific Fleet. Battleships were sunk or damaged. The Navy needed time to rebuild. In the meantime, they needed weapons that could harass the Japanese and slow their advance. PT boats were perfect for this role. They were cheap to build. A PT boat cost roughly $300,000. A destroyer cost millions. PT boats could be constructed quickly. Building a destroyer took over a year. A PT boat could be completed in weeks. And PT boats could operate from forward bases without needing major port facilities. The Navy ordered hundreds of PT boats. Factories worked around the clock to produce them. By 1943, PT boat squadrons were operating throughout the Pacific, and the Japanese were about to learn why these small boats would become their worst nightmare. The tactics used by PT boats were simple but devastatingly effective. They were designed around one principle: strike fast and disappear faster. PT boat attacks almost always happen at night. Darkness was their greatest ally. The small wooden boats were nearly invisible on radar. The Japanese radar systems of that era could easily detect large metal ships, but the wooden hulls of PT boats reflected almost no radar signal. This meant PT boats could approach enemy ships without being detected until it was too late. A typical attack would begin with PT boats hiding in the shadow of an island or along a coastline. Their crews would wait patiently, engines idling quietly, watching for enemy ships. When a target was spotted, the boats would spring into action. The PT boats would race toward the enemy at maximum speed, their engines roaring, their hulls slapping against the waves. They would approach from different angles, spreading out to confuse the enemy gunners. Japanese sailors would suddenly hear the thunder of approaching engines and see small shapes racing toward them from multiple directions. When the PT boats reached torpedo range, usually about 500 yards, they would launch their deadly fish. The torpedoes would speed through the water at over 25 knots, leaving trails of bubbles that were invisible in the darkness. The PT boats would immediately turn away and flee at maximum speed. By the time the torpedoes struck their targets, the PT boats would already be racing towards safety. The Japanese found these attacks incredibly difficult to defend against. Their deck guns were designed to engage targets at long range. By the time lookouts spotted approaching PT boats, there was often less than a minute before torpedo launch. The small size and high speed of the boats made them almost impossible to hit. And even if gunners did score hits, the wooden boats often did not sink immediately. There was no ammunition magazine to explode, no fuel bunkers to ignite. The boats would take damage but keep moving. The psychological effect on Japanese sailors was profound. Every night brought the possibility of attack. Crews could not sleep. They were constantly on edge. Every shadow on the water might be a devil boat waiting to strike. This constant stress wore down Japanese morale month after month. No discussion of PT boats is complete without mentioning the most famous PT boat incident of the war. This incident involved a young lieutenant who would later become President of the United States. His name was John Fitzgerald Kennedy. In August 1943, Lieutenant Kennedy was commanding PT 109 in the Solomon Islands. His squadron was patrolling the Blackett Strait, a narrow waterway that Japanese destroyers used to resupply their troops. On the night of August 2nd, Kennedy and his crew were on patrol when disaster struck. A Japanese destroyer named Amagirai was racing through the strait at high speed. The night was extremely dark. Neither vessel saw the other until it was too late. The Amagirai slammed directly into PT 109, cutting the small boat completely in half. The impact killed 2 of Kennedy's crew instantly. The boat burst into flames as gasoline ignited. The survivors were thrown into water, surrounded by burning fuel. Kennedy himself was hurled against the cockpit, injuring his back, but he quickly took charge of the situation. Kennedy gathered his surviving crew members in the water. One man, Patrick McMahon, was badly burned and could barely swim. Kennedy grabbed McMahon's life jacket strap in his teeth and towed the injured man through the water. For hours, Kennedy swam while pulling McMahon behind him. The survivors eventually reached a small island, but they were deep in Japanese-controlled territory. Kennedy refused to give up. He swam to other nearby islands looking for food and water. He eventually encountered local islanders who were friendly to the Americans. Kennedy carved a message into a coconut shell, asking the islanders to deliver it to Allied forces. The message read, "Noro ISL Commander Native knows POS it. He can pilot 11 alive, needs small boat Kennedy." The coconut was delivered to an Australian coast watcher. A rescue was organized. Kennedy and his crew were saved after 6 days stranded behind enemy lines. Kennedy's actions earned him the Navy and Marine Corps Medal. His courage under fire became a symbol of PT boat spirit. Years later, when Kennedy ran for president, the story of PT 109 became a central part of his campaign. The coconut he carved sat on his desk in the Oval Office for the rest of his presidency. The fear that Japanese sailors felt toward PT boats was real and documented. Japanese naval records captured after the war revealed just how much these small boats were feared. Japanese sailors gave PT boats several nicknames. Devil boats was the most common, but they also called them green dragons because of the phosphorescent wake the boats created in tropical waters. Some called them mosquito boats because of their buzzing engines and annoying attacks. The fear came from several sources. First was the element of surprise. PT boats could appear without warning from any direction. Japanese lookouts never knew when or where an attack might come. This uncertainty created constant anxiety. Second was the speed. Japanese sailors reported feeling helpless, as these small boats raced toward them faster than their guns could track. It was like trying to shoot a racing car with a rifle. By the time you aimed and fired, the target had already moved. Third was the deadliness of the torpedoes. Japanese sailors knew that a torpedo hit could mean death. They had seen what PT boat torpedoes did to their comrade ships. The explosions were massive. Ships sank quickly. Men who survived the initial explosion often drowned in the dark water or were eaten by sharks. Fourth was the impossibility of revenge. When a Japanese ship was attacked by American bombers, at least the ship could fight back. Anti-aircraft guns could be fired. There was something to shoot at. But PT boats attacked and vanished. Japanese sailors could not chase them because PT boats were faster. They could not see them because the boats were too small. They could only wait helplessly for the next attack. Japanese commanders tried various countermeasures. They assigned destroyers specifically to hunt PT boats. They installed more searchlights on their ships. They changed their patrol routes and schedules. None of it worked consistently. The PT boats adapted their tactics and continued their deadly work. By 1944, some Japanese supply convoys refused to travel at night through waters known to have PT boat activity. They preferred to risk American air attacks during the day rather than face the devil boats at night. This showed just how deeply the fear had penetrated Japanese naval thinking. PT boat crews were a special breed of sailors. They were typically young. Most officers were in their early 20s. Enlisted men were often teenagers. The Navy wanted men who were aggressive, resourceful, and comfortable with extreme risk. Life aboard a PT boat was nothing like life aboard a regular Navy ship. There was no formal hierarchy of the kind found on destroyers or battleships. Officers and enlisted men worked side by side in cramped conditions. They ate the same food. They faced the same dangers. This created tight bonds between crew members. PT boat crews lived hard lives. The boats were uncomfortable. There was little shelter from tropical sun or rain. The constant pounding of high-speed runs damaged men's backs and joints. Sleep was difficult because patrols happened at night. Food was often canned rations that had gone bad in the tropical heat. But PT boat sailors would not have traded their assignment for anything. They had freedom that regular Navy sailors could only dream about. PT boat squadrons operated far from the main fleet. They made their own decisions. They lived by their own rules. For young men seeking adventure, this was the ultimate experience. The danger was very real. PT boats were fragile. A single shell hit could destroy the plywood hull. The gasoline fuel was extremely flammable. Many PT boats were lost in combat. More were lost accidents, storms, and mechanical failures. Crew members knew that every patrol might be their last. Despite the dangers, PT boat crews achieved remarkable success. They sank or damaged hundreds of Japanese vessels during the war. They rescued downed pilots from behind enemy lines. They inserted commandos onto enemy-held islands. They served as advanced scouts for invasion fleets. Their contributions to victory in the Pacific were far greater than their small numbers would suggest. The last PT boats were retired from Navy service shortly after World War II ended. The Navy decided that jet aircraft and guided missiles had made torpedo boats obsolete. The era of the Devil boats was over, but their legacy lived on. The tactics developed by PT boat commanders influenced naval strategy for decades. The concept of small, fast attack craft was adopted by navies around the world. Today's missile boats and fast attack craft owe their existence to the lessons learned by PT boat crews in World War II. Many PT boat veterans went on to distinguished careers after the war. John F. Kennedy became president. Other veterans became business leaders, politicians, and community pillars. They formed associations to preserve the memory of their service. A few surviving PT boats were restored and placed in museums where visitors can see these remarkable vessels today. The story of the Devil boats is ultimately a story about courage and innovation. It is about young men who took flimsy wooden boats into battle against steel warships. It is about tactics that turned weakness into strength. It is about the American spirit of improvisation and daring. The Japanese were right to fear the Devil boats. These small craft proved that size does not always determine victory. Speed, surprise, and courage can overcome seemingly impossible odds. That lesson remains as relevant today as it was in the dark waters of the Pacific 8 decades ago. That is a complete story of the Devil boats, tiny wooden craft that terrorized the Imperial Japanese Navy. Fast attack boats that struck from the darkness and vanished before the enemy could respond. Young men who risked everything in some of the most dangerous missions of World War II. The next time you read about naval warfare, remember the PT boats. Remember that sometimes the most effective weapon is not the biggest or most expensive. Sometimes it is a small boat with a brave crew that makes all the difference.